My name is Ronald Andrews, and my wife's name is Carmen. We first met back in college. She was 22, and I was 23. At the time, I was serving in the Army while working on 2 degrees, economics and accounting. Carmen was studying biology. My military assignments were irregular and often dangerous. Our unit was sent on secret missions where we had to deal with people who acted friendly but weren't. By the time I graduated at 25, I knew I wanted a different life. 2 years later, I left the Army and married Carmen. Over the next 4 years, we had 2 daughters. I started working on my own, handling accounting for small businesses and trading goods from home. Carmen stayed home with the girls until she eventually got a position in a lab linked to a local college. 10 years into our marriage, when both our daughters were finally in school, I decided to work from home full-time. That gave Carmen the chance to go back to work, which she had been eager to do. We lived in my childhood home, which we bought from my parents when they moved to Florida. During my Army days, our team sometimes brought home valuables from missions, and we divided those among ourselves. That money helped us feel more secure. So, to celebrate February 1st, we made plans to go out to dinner and dancing with a few couples from our neighborhood. There were 8 of us, all leaving the kids with babysitters. Carmen and I even booked a hotel room connected to the club for the night. She wore a tight blue silk dress and looked polished and graceful for someone, still slender with dark brown hair. We had a great dinner and hit the dance floor. While we were enjoying the night, a group of 6 people walked in. One of them was David Carey, a local football linebacker. Every woman at our table noticed him immediately. He came in with a tall, blonde woman flashing a massive engagement ring. Our friend Lily whispered that the blonde was a cheerleader and engaged to Chase, one of David's teammates. A while later, David glanced over at our table and walked straight toward us, toward Carmen. He didn't even look at me. He asked her to dance. I tried to step in, but before I could say much, Carmen had already taken his hand and walked away with him like I wasn't even there. Annoyed, I went to the bar and ordered a coffee, trying to keep calm. I watched them dance like no one else existed. When a slow song started, my chest tightened. Carmen wrapped her arms around David like they were lovers. People at our table were giving me awkward glances, but I ignored them and stayed by the bar. Even when the music ended, she didn't come back right away. When she finally returned, she seemed flustered and sat next to Lily, avoiding eye contact. I made a sharp comment about how much fun they seemed to be having, and maybe I sounded bitter, but I couldn't help it. Lily jumped in, trying to downplay it. She said it was just a dance, but I knew better. I sat down and didn't say much. A little later, Lily and Carmen said they were heading to the restroom. But after some time, only Lily came back. I immediately asked her where Carmen was, and she hesitated before answering. Then she said it. Carmen had left with David. I rushed out of the club and saw a red Escalade speeding away, with Carmen climbing into the passenger seat. Back inside, Lily turned to the rest of the group, clearly shaken, and asked if anyone else had seen what just happened. I told them to let Carmen enjoy her night, figuring she'd crawl back by morning, but deep down, I'd had enough. My anger boiled over, and I said loud and clear that I didn't want her back. As far as I was concerned, our marriage was done. That got people at the table talking. A few thought I was being too harsh, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. I snapped, saying I was finished with all of it, especially since everyone had watched what happened and said nothing. They just sat there while my wife humiliated me. I stood up and headed to the coat check. That's when I noticed a blonde woman from David's table crying quietly. I walked over and asked her if she was David's fiancée. She nodded but added that their relationship was basically over. She told me they had a house together on Cherry Lane and that he had sworn he'd stop pulling stunts like this once they got engaged. She said she was sorry and warned me David would probably be done with Carmen by morning, drop her off like nothing happened, and laugh about sleeping with another man's wife. 2 of the guys sitting nearby, one black and one white, didn't like what she said and gave me dirty looks. I didn't care. I handed the blonde my business card and told her to call me. Through her tears, she managed a small smile as I turned and walked away. I grabbed my coat, but I left Carmen's behind without a second thought. I went upstairs to the hotel room, picked up my bag, and didn't touch hers. After checking out, I got into my car and started driving home. That's when the plan hit me, fully formed, sharp, and clear. I should have thought of it back in my Army days. When I got home, I parked in the garage and activated the alarm system. Then I went down to the basement and grabbed some rope. I changed clothes fast, black Under Armour shirt, black hoodie, dark gray sweats, old sneakers, and 2 pairs of gloves. I grabbed a balaclava mask, too. Climbing into the attic, I tied the rope to a beam the same way I used to as a kid. I squeezed out through a tight window, slid down the side of the house, and sprinted through the woods nearby. Hopping the side fence, I made my way to the back workshop. Inside, I picked up a backpack, a pair of wool socks, and my old hand axe from the tool chest. I packed what I needed, then got on my bike and pedaled toward the river. I crossed the bridge and made my way to Cherry Lane. I spotted the place right away, the house with a football statue in the yard and the red Escalade parked in the driveway. I walked up, pulled out the axe, and smashed the passenger side window. The alarm started blaring. I ducked behind a pillar on the porch. When the front door opened, I didn't wait. I stepped out and took the man down fast with 2 hard swings of the axe. He dropped instantly. I went inside, shut the front door, and ran back out through the yard. I leapt over a stone wall, found my bike, and opened the backpack. I stuffed in the axe, knife, gloves, shoes, and the wool socks, zipped it shut, and rode back toward the river. Near the bridge, I stopped. Without hesitating, I hurled the backpack into the fast-moving water. It had rained the day before, so the current was strong and deep. The bag sank immediately and was gone. Riding back through the woods, I entered the workshop quietly. I changed into clean socks and another pair of sneakers. I wiped the handlebars and pedals with an ammonia spray, making sure to remove any prints. I jumped the fence again and climbed back up the side of the house. It was harder than I expected, but I managed to slip back through the attic window and pulled the rope in behind me. I wiped the window ledge with a rag and climbed down to the basement. There, I took off everything, the mask, gloves, clothes, and tossed them into the washing machine in the basement bathroom. Then I showered, scrubbing down twice, making sure not to leave any trace. After drying off, I threw on a pair of gym shorts and went upstairs, leaving the basement door open so I could hear the washer when it stopped. I sat for a moment, then got up and changed into the same clothes I wore to the club. Back in the basement, I moved the wet clothes into the dryer, then returned to the kitchen and made a snack. I poured myself a shot of whiskey and sat on the couch, letting everything sink in. When the dryer finished, I brought the clean clothes upstairs and put them away. The balaclava went back into the closet where I'd always kept it. I checked the time, 3:50 a.m. Everything that had happened, from the club to the house and back, had taken just under 3 hours. I went downstairs again, poured another whiskey, and laid down on the couch. I must have dozed off, because the sound of the door chime woke me. I checked the security camera on my phone and saw 2 people at the door, an African-American woman and a white man with a buzz cut. They were cops. The doorbell rang again, and I opened it. They held up badges, Detectives Gardner and Hancock. Acting surprised, I asked if they knew where Carmen was, telling them I was worried something might have happened. They said Carmen was alive and not physically hurt, but that a man named Mr. Dickinson had been attacked. I let them in and asked again, where was Carmen? The white detective answered. Carmen was at the hospital. She was being treated for shock. I paused for a second, looking both detectives in the eye. When they motioned toward the couch, I suggested they make themselves comfortable. They chose 2 separate chairs while I settled onto the couch. You probably want to know what happened, I said. Detective Hancock repeated my words and asked what I'd done after Carmen left the club with Dickinson. Detective Gardner jumped in, urging me to give them a full timeline. I told them that after she left, I went back to our hotel room, packed my stuff, and drove home. I mentioned that I'd had just enough to drink to fall asleep on the couch. When they asked if anyone else had been home, I told them the kids were with a sitter. They wanted to know if I'd gotten any calls or emails that night. I shook my head and said I hadn't stepped outside once. Detective Gardner looked around and asked about the home security system. I offered to show them how it worked. Come upstairs, I said, leading them to the office. I sat at the desk and pulled up the system, downloading the log from 6 p.m. until now. I handed over a flash drive and explained how the system tracked movement through the front door, side entrance, and the sliding patio door near the pool. I also pointed out that the side I'd used to sneak in didn't have a door, just 2 large windows facing the woods that couldn't be opened. Hancock said they'd need to take the computer. I questioned that, suggesting it could have been tampered with before they got there. He admitted that was possible but said it wouldn't be gone long. I told him I'd back up the files myself. Then they asked to look around. I said yes, but on the condition they stayed with me and didn't split up. They agreed, took a few photos, and eventually left. I looked at the time, it was 7:10 a.m. I called Carmen's parents, Paul and Amanda, to fill them in. They were staying at their lake house. Paul was stunned by what Carmen had done. Amanda, on the other hand, didn't seem all that surprised. When she asked if I planned to visit Carmen, I told her no. After everything that happened, I was done. I told them the attack on Dickinson wasn't my problem. The man had a long history of acting like that. I made it clear that when Carmen got out of the hospital, she wasn't coming back here. We'd deal with her stuff later. Paul suggested I be the one to leave and let Carmen stay in the house. I shut that idea down. This house is mine. It was never shared property. After that, I called my parents down in Florida. They were just as shocked by the news. My dad said he saw a story online about Dickinson being attacked, maybe even killed, in his home. I wasn't surprised. Then the landline rang. It was Nancy. She wanted to know how Carmen was doing. She'd heard about what happened to David. I told her Carmen was in the hospital, in shock, and that I had no interest in seeing her. Nancy tried to convince me to go support Carmen. I told her flat out, after what Carmen did, I was done being the supportive husband. The call got heated. Nancy called me cold and unreasonable, then hung up. I took another shower, got dressed, and went to pick up the girls from the sitter around 8. When we got home, they asked where their mom was. I told them she wouldn't be around that day. I didn't want to ruin their weekend, so I said we'd stick to our plans. We all got ready and headed out for their soccer games, one at noon, the other at 1:30. At the complex, I sat back and relaxed while they played. After the games, I treated them to some ice cream. When we got home, I checked my phone, which had been on silent. There were a few messages. One was from Carmen's parents, saying she was at St. Jude's Hospital but wasn't speaking to anyone. Another was from a doctor there, asking me to call back. And then there was one from Nancy again. She said Carmen had been with the police but wasn't talking, and maybe I should calm down and let the girls visit her. I called the girls into the room and explained that their mom was in the hospital. She was okay physically, but she was emotionally shaken. They wanted to know what had happened, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them the truth. Last night, your mom went off with a famous football player and went to his house. Someone attacked him while she was there. She wasn't hurt, but she's in shock. I knew they'd hear the story from someone else eventually, so better they hear it from me. They weren't sure if they wanted to visit her. I said we should try anyway and told them to get dressed. I called Dr. Ella Edwards back. She said Carmen was catatonic, emotionally frozen. I asked if bringing the girls might help. She wasn't sure at first, then asked if the girls knew the full story. I said yes, they understood what had happened. She told me to bring them, and we'd meet Dr. Ferguson in room 3 in about 30 minutes. Dr. Ferguson was a psychiatrist, maybe late 30s. She met us at the room and briefly explained Carmen's condition to the girls: shock, confusion, temporary emotional shutdown. She said seeing familiar faces might help. The girls wanted to see her, so I opened the door. Inside, Carmen was sitting in the hospital bed, staring blankly at cartoons on the TV. The girls hesitated, then Emma walked up, gently touched her hand, and said, "Mom?" Heidi followed, quietly repeating her name. Carmen didn't move, didn't even blink. Heidi began to cry, and I picked her up. I looked at Carmen one last time. Nothing. Still frozen. I took Emma by the hand and led them out. "We tried," I said. Emma asked, "Will she wake up?" "She will," I told her. "I know she will." Dr. Ferguson nodded. "I'll contact you as soon as she comes out of this." As we left the hospital, both girls were crying in the back seat. I couldn't help wondering, had bringing them been the right call? I tried to believe that maybe seeing the girls would help Carmen somehow. Even though her betrayal was still fresh and raw, I didn't want her to suffer like this. As much as I resented her, I couldn't ignore the pain she was in. I felt tears start to roll down my face. Back at home, I cooked eggs and toast, asking the girls to help so we could lighten the mood a little. After breakfast, I set them up with a movie in my office. Then I called a friend of mine who works as a public defender. I wanted to know what had happened at Dickinson's house after I left. He told me that official police reports weren't public yet, but ambulance-run reports might be available. I asked him to dig into that and call me back. I tried to relax and watch the movie with the girls, but my mind kept drifting. I couldn't stop thinking about what could happen next. Soon after, he called back. He'd found the ambulance report and emailed it to me. It didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made things worse. I told him the police had already visited me and seen the security footage. He said that if no one showed up on the video coming or going, I probably didn't have anything to worry about. Still, he warned me not to take any chances. Get a lawyer, just in case. Even though I felt confident, I called the lawyer he recommended. Her name was Helen McKenzie. I read over the ambulance report while waiting for her call, and my stomach turned. According to it, the police had found Carmen in Dickinson's house, drenched in blood, holding his head in her lap. She was wearing a thin robe, rocking back and forth and repeating the words, "No," over and over again. They had tried to question her, but she didn't respond. That image, Carmen sitting there like that, haunted me. I started looking into trauma and catatonic shock again. I already knew a little, but now I dove deeper, reading about PTSD and how it could affect someone long after they recovered. Helen scheduled a meeting with me for Monday at 9 a.m. and gave me her personal number in case the police came by earlier. But Sunday came and went without a knock. That day, the girls and I tried our best to stay calm. We told ourselves Carmen would recover, even if things would never be the same. I kept wondering what Carmen actually saw. Maybe nothing. If she had seen anything, it would have been a masked figure in black, not me. She had no reason to suspect it was me. I'd never given her a clue that I could be capable of anything like that. Monday came. After dropping the girls off at school, I watched the local news. They confirmed Dickinson was dead. Carmen's name wasn't mentioned, but it was clear he'd been with a married woman at the time, and a neighbor had called the police after hearing her scream. So far, only the authorities knew it was Carmen, or me, but that wouldn't last. Helen arrived, a well-dressed woman in her mid-40s, confident and sharp. She read the ambulance report and shook her head in disgust. We talked about the house security footage and whether it could protect me. I asked for my computer back, and she agreed to call the police and asked Detective Gardner to return it. I had already checked the system myself, no signs of tampering. She scheduled our Monday appointment and repeated her offer to send someone from her office to help. I refused. "He's not coming here," I said firmly. She understood. Before we hung up, I made one thing clear. I wouldn't speak to the police unless everything was recorded. That afternoon, when the girls came home, they immediately asked about their mom. I had already spoken with the doctor earlier, no change. Carmen was still unresponsive. They worked on their homework, and later we ordered pizza. I joked with them, saying, "If your mom doesn't come home soon, I'll have to become a world-class chef." They laughed. Truth is, I could cook just fine. I just rarely did it. Later that evening, after her sister went upstairs, Emma stayed behind and asked quietly, "Would you ever forgive Mom for cheating?" I paused. "Right now," I said, "I just want her to get better." Just then, the landline rang. A man introduced himself, Tom Kendall, a reporter from the Trib. He said they had sources saying my wife had been with David Carey when he was killed. I told him I wasn't interested in talking, especially with how this could affect our daughters. He hinted that the story would come out either way. I sighed and confirmed that, yes, Carmen was there. Then he asked how I felt about the fact that her lover had died. I warned him, if anything in his story caused harm to my daughters or my family, I would take legal action against him and his newspaper. "This is going to come out, Mr. Andrews," Tom said. "I can't stop that." I glanced out the window. A news van was parked out front. I said, "Yeah, I see it." And I hung up. A moment later, someone knocked on the door. I checked the camera feed and saw a young woman holding a microphone. I pressed the intercom button. "Leave now. You're trespassing. I'll call the police." Some of the women involved had their husbands present, which raised even more questions and led to further investigation. Commander Davis ended the press conference by saying any updates would be shared at the Wednesday briefing. The police left as reporters shouted questions behind them. I arranged with the school to have the girls' assignments sent to us electronically for the next few days. I also gave Carmen's parents a call, warning them to be careful with the media. Luckily, there were no reporters hanging around their place yet. On Tuesday, the doctor called with an update. Carmen was showing early signs of responsiveness. The police were with her at the hospital. I let her parents know and took the girls over to see her. When we arrived, the police were just leaving. Detective Gardner approached me and said she wanted to talk. I agreed to speak with her after we saw Carmen. Carmen looked out of it, but when she saw the girls, she forced a smile and gave them hugs. Her reaction to me was distant, barely a nod. The girls told her about the news trucks and cameras at school, but Carmen seemed to drift off mid-conversation as if the moment overwhelmed her. The doctor stepped in and suggested letting her rest. While Carmen's parents sat with the girls, I stepped outside to talk with Gardner. She mentioned that Carmen seemed to be recovering. "Maybe," I said. "Hard to tell." Gardner asked if I planned to bring Carmen home once she was well enough. I looked at her for a second before answering. "You think she deserves to come back?" Gardner hinted that Carmen might not return at all, that it was likely we'd separate once things settled down. I pushed back. She's been through enough, hasn't she? But I wasn't trying to defend her. For me, this wasn't about punishing her. It was about respect, trust, and she destroyed both. I told Gardner that even if Carmen made it back home, I'd never trust her again. I doubted she respected me, either. Gardner gave me a knowing smile. Maybe she's afraid of you. Maybe you're not someone people trust either. It was bait. I saw that. I told her not to play games with me. She said she didn't believe I was involved in Dickinson's death, but added that a normal guy probably couldn't have pulled it off. But someone with your background, she said. Maybe. I didn't flinch. It wasn't me, I said calmly. And you've already seen the security footage from Dickinson's house. Gardner waved it off. Not my concern, she said, ending the conversation with a casual, I'll be seeing you. Over the next few days, Carmen's condition improved. I took the girls to visit daily, but I didn't stay long in her room. I kept my distance. On the fourth day, right before discharge, Carmen asked if we could talk alone. I sent the girls out. She apologized. Said she knew she'd embarrassed me and that sorry didn't cut it. She asked if she could come home when she got out. Said she didn't want to add more drama to the girls' lives. The media was already causing enough of that. She suggested sneaking out to avoid the cameras. I looked her over. You're good at sneaking out, I said flatly. She looked away, mumbling something about checking with hospital security. I told her I didn't really want her back home, but for now, I had no other option. I made it clear I never wanted her hurt. I just wanted honesty, something she clearly couldn't give. Then I asked the question, did you sleep with Dickinson? She paused, then claimed they had just undressed and gotten into bed when everything happened. I stared at her. She was lying. I could see it. I didn't say anything else. I didn't believe her, and I never would again. Trust was gone. Forever. I told her we'd see how things played out, but she shouldn't expect forgiveness. Even so, I said it. I told her I still loved her. Then I left. Later, I went to the hospital security office and arranged for Carmen to be picked up from the rear exit at 5 p.m. to avoid the press. Everything went smoothly, and she arrived home around 5:35. Her parents and the kids were waiting. I had moved into my office and set up a bed there. Carmen would stay in the master bedroom. The whole house felt heavy with tension. That evening, Carmen, her mom, and the kids played Monopoly in the living room. Her dad and I stepped out onto the patio for some air. Paul asked me what my plan was. I admitted I wasn't sure, but it was starting to feel like this marriage was over. He encouraged me to forgive her, bringing up their long history and the family we had built. I didn't argue. I just listened. But Paul spoke up with doubts. He was disturbed by Carmen's comments about not feeling close to me. He was also bothered by the idea she might have cheated without protection. I agreed. Her story was shaky, and there were too many unknowns about what really happened that night. I brought up the risks, pregnancy, all of it. Paul didn't like hearing it, but he agreed to let Carmen stay for now, saying I needed to figure out something more permanent soon. We went back inside and sat down for pizza with everyone. Her parents left not long after dinner. As far as I could tell, they hadn't brought up anything about David Dickinson to her. That night, while I helped get the girls ready for bed, Emma looked up at Carmen and asked her why she'd been with David. Carmen gave a soft apology, admitting she'd made a mistake, that she'd been weak. Emma frowned. He's not Dad, she said, then promised to talk about it more later when she could make sense of it. Once the girls were tucked in, Carmen went into the kitchen. I followed about 10 minutes later, already on the phone with my public defender friend to ask if he could get me a copy of the autopsy report. He confirmed it was a public document and said he'd pull it for me. While I was still on the call, Carmen, sipping a Pepsi like everything was normal, asked if I was planning to sleep in our room. No, I said. I'll be in the office. She told me I was welcome to join her anytime, but said she understood if I didn't want to. She admitted things were uncertain now. I told her I wasn't holding my breath. She asked me to be patient, pointing out that all of this had only happened a week ago. I didn't reply. I just headed upstairs. Sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, and by 5 a.m., I gave up. I made coffee and sat down at the computer. The autopsy report had come in overnight. I read it carefully. The injuries were brutal, but what hit hardest was the physical evidence. Traces of male and female fluids were found on David. Carmen's DNA was confirmed. So much for we didn't sleep together. She had looked me in the eye and lied again. I'd wanted to believe her. I tried. I figured she showed up to his place a couple hours before things went south and left untouched. I was wrong. That morning, we got the girls ready and off to school. The house felt heavier than usual. The girls picked up on the tension but didn't say anything. Driving gave me space to think. If Carmen wasn't recovering from trauma, I would have thrown her out already. But her being around helped with the kids, and for now, I needed that stability. As I stepped back inside the house, another TV truck rolled up. A young woman jumped out and shouted, asking if Carmen was home, wanted to know if I'd forgiven her. I waved politely and told her to stay off my property. Then I went back inside. Carmen had just pulled some biscuits out of the oven like it was any other day. She offered me one. "Did they know you were home?" she asked, glancing out the window toward the truck. "Maybe they shouldn't." I stared at her. She acted so casual, like none of this mattered. She asked if the media could make things any worse. I told her they probably could and would. She caught my expression and asked if I was thinking about her, or thinking about us. "I need you to write everything down," I told her. The night of the party, the argument with David, what happened after. All of it. Start to finish. I didn't demand it immediately, but she knew I expected it soon. She agreed, though she said it would be painful. Then she mentioned needing to call work, to see if she still had a job. I couldn't resist. "Why would your job care that you cheated on your husband?" She said it wasn't that, just that she'd missed a week already. She called them and found out they were covering the absence using her sick days and vacation time. After that, she headed to her room and sat at her computer. I left her alone and went into my office, diving back into the autopsy report. I wanted clarity, but deep down I already knew. The results would take a few more days to be fully processed, but I wasn't expecting any surprises. I knew the truth. And Carmen, she was pretending nothing had changed, but I could tell. She was watching me too, wondering what I was planning next. We fell into a routine. 2 days passed like that. Quiet, awkward, tense. Then the final test results came in. Carmen's DNA was all over David Dickinson. Her lie had completely unraveled. I waited, giving her the chance to hand me her written version of the night. But I already knew. This marriage was dead. The next evening, after dinner, she came into my office with a piece of paper. "I finished," she said, handing it to me. I took a seat and started reading. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. She admitted she was drawn to David. Said she got swept up in the moment. How the music, his reputation, the attention, she let it all get to her. When they danced, she said it felt like everything else disappeared. During a slow song, she pressed herself into him and felt something stir in her. She said she knew right then. If he asked, she'd go with him. No hesitation. And that's exactly what happened. She said David whispered in her ear, told her to sneak out with him. Said he could show her something she'd never forget. And she went along with it, no struggle, no second thoughts. She lied, said she was going to the restroom. In reality, she was making her move. She admitted she saw I was upset when I got back, but figured I'd get over it. At that point, all she cared about was being with David. They left the club together, went back to his house. After some kissing, he carried her upstairs and into his bed. Their time was cut short by a car alarm. David had stepped outside, telling her to wait. Carmen stood at the window, trying to see past the porch roof. She caught a glimpse, just someone in black, running off and jumping the fence. She pulled on a robe and ran to the front door. That's where she found David, his body crumpled on the driveway, his head crushed in. She told me it felt like instant punishment. Like karma had shown up right then and there. The cops arrived soon after, and from there, it was the hospital. She apologized again, said she still loved me and couldn't understand why she did what she did. Then, through tears, she looked at me and asked, "Was it you? Was I the person she'd seen running off?" I told her the truth. I'd been home all night, drowning in whiskey and regret, watching the pieces of our marriage fall apart. I admitted I'd hated her in that moment, but the police already confirmed my alibi with our home security footage. She nodded slowly, but I cut her off before she could try to explain anything else. "Dickinson got what he deserved," I said. Carmen shook her head. "No, he didn't deserve to die," she argued. "He was a good man. He helped me. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story." I shut it down right there. "We're not doing that," I told her. "After what you did, I'll never love you again. Maybe I don't anymore. The woman I married, she never would have done this." Then I asked her the one thing I needed to know. Was it worth it? She stared at me, amazing. But no, it wasn't worth what we'd lost. I sat there, thinking. If David hadn't died that night, Maybe I would have tried to forgive her. Maybe we'd have worked through it. But he did die, and now everything felt destroyed. That's when she said it. You killed him. Then she stormed out. I sat there for a while and said under my breath, you're the one who ended him, not me. From that moment on, things between us turned cold. No more small talk, no more pretending. Just silence. I decided I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to confess. I wasn't going to save this marriage either. There was nothing left to save. And I knew, if I ever told her the truth, she'd run straight to the police. She hadn't said the words, but it was clear. If David had lived, she would have stood by that night, no matter what it cost us. That was her choice. A few weeks later, I filed for divorce. I asked for full custody so the kids could stay in their home. Carmen still had her job, so I didn't go after alimony or child support. I just wanted a clean break. I made sure she had full visitation rights. She had recovered enough by then that I told her it was time to move out. She went to stay with her parents. A few days later, I had the papers served. Her father called me not long after. He asked me to reconsider, said Carmen was falling apart. I told him if she wasn't falling apart, then something was seriously wrong. I suggested he help her find a good lawyer. He was angry, but I couldn't tell if he was mad at me or at her. He asked about the kids. I said Carmen could come by any night, spend time with them, stay until bedtime. That wasn't going to change. The next day at 5, Carmen showed up. I'd made mac and cheese for the girls, and we all ate together. Afterward, we played some board games, then tucked them in. Carmen lingered after bedtime, clearly hoping to talk. She told me we needed to work something out for the girls. She even suggested that maybe if we split up, we could find a weekend spot for the kids to visit. Keep things simple. She kept pushing, saying that the faster we handled the divorce, the faster the kids could adjust. Then she said it again, that she regretted her mistake and still loved me. I shut it down immediately. After what you did with him. No, this is done. It's time you accepted that. She started crying, her sobs quiet but steady. I felt a flicker of pity, but not enough to change my mind. The marriage was finished. Nothing she could say would bring it back. We finalized the divorce soon after and agreed on joint custody. Carmen found an apartment, made sure it had a big second bedroom for the girls. We fell into a routine. It wasn't warm, but it was civil. We both focused on the kids. A few months later, I started dating again. Word had gotten around that I was single. Women in our circle and from work started to notice. All of a sudden, I had their attention.